what if I just figured something out about myself on your show?
I love it.
You're such a good host.
I'm taking this to my therapy this week. Today's guest is a multi-hyphenate Broadway veteran. Please welcome to the Zoom, Erik Liberman. Hello.
I couldn't get to the button fast enough.
How are you?
I'm well. Thank you very much for having these conversations and opening the door to them.
The conversations that you held that I got to be a part of in Bridge to Broadway were
Yeah.
so inspiring. And that was a huge motivator for me to start these conversations. So thank you for what you've done.
Well, thank you for paying it forward, and that was the point, was to inspire a level of inquiry and curiosity that bred a tribe of searchers, because when curiosity dies, so does artistry.
Mm, yeah. Well, on that note, we start behind the resume by talking about how we met. And we met through your incredible Bridge to Broadway program in the pandemic. And I found Bridge to Broadway through John Carafa, who I
Oh,
interviewed on Behind the Resume. But
yeah,
I worked with him. I danced on a show called Dead to Me that he choreographed, and he's
yes.
incredible. And so he had posted that he was doing this Zoom, and the
Ah,
pandemic had just started. And so of course, I was going to be there. And it was so, I mean, he's just extraordinary.
yeah.
It was incredible. But that's how I found Bridge to Broadway. And then I think I was on quite literally every Zoom did. And
Well,
I told you this, but I made myself a pamphlet so I could take notes. So I had written out every guest that you had and their credits, and I gave myself space, and I could show it to you. I
well,
still have my packet of notes from all of those Zoom calls.
well, then the effort was worth it. I love John Carafa. I've gotten to work with him a bunch, and have friends who also worked on Dead to Me.
Hmm.
So the world gets smaller as it gets larger, and I'm so glad that you that those efforts bore fruit, and that you are in turn doing your version of illuminating possibility in the world.
Oh, it was wonderful. How was that something that you started because of the pandemic, or
Yeah.
you always, oh, wow.
Well, I had some teaching engagements in New York. I was living in LA, and everything got canceled because the world shut down.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, this could last 2 weeks. And I was in the shower actually, and sort of a lightning bolt just kind of hit me, and I heard this phrase, "Bridge to Broadway."
Hmm.
Oh, well, that sounds like an interesting idea. And I had used Zoom once or twice, so the first wave was just reaching out to friends that I knew quite well and would probably say yes. But then it took on a whole other life of its own, not only because the pandemic lengthened our efforts and the need deepened among students to feel unabandoned, and also artists to feel they had a space to give something back. But we wanted to um, create a space where every student could find a mentor or a role model. Every student could see a version of themselves, and the decentralizing of the pedagogy away from standards of education that had been enforced at every level in this country was as important to us as anything, because we didn't want a student who um, was in a wheelchair to not see a successful actor in a wheelchair, et
Mhm.
cetera, et cetera. I mean, across the boards, the desire was to um, when you think of the word diversity, what's curious about it is the word diversity requires a central figure from which you are diverting, which in this case would be the white uh, guy. And even though I was hosting it, and even though I founded and produced it, I wanted everyone's voices to be central, so that there was no such thing as diversity. There was such a thing as ownership of global citizenship and universality, because we had students from all over the world, and everyone should feel that they belong and they have a safe space. So that worked in perfect tandem with what was going on in the country at the time. You know,
Mhm.
Black Lives Matter and so many marginalized groups asserting visibility at a time when the world had been put on pause and could finally, between the stiffness of the way we may have perceived the world before, to crack through that with the reflective time that the pandemic afforded us. That was the only way that people could start to see what our default modes were versus what was possible. You know, because really what we had was Zoom. We were
Mhm.
all together suddenly in a crucible, and it
Yeah.
was yeah. I mean, that's quite a mouthful, but the truth is, it was just a way for us to accept the picture is much more colorful, much more interesting, and filled with so many more life experiences outside of our own. And I wanted people to know that because there are a zillion storytelling traditions. I'm in a writer's group now, and you know, one person has HIV and has had it since birth, and another's in a wheelchair, and another from the Caribbean, and another's a transhuman from the Philippines, and some myself had a near death experience when we were young. Everyone has something that other people may not understand, but there's a space to respect that and to listen and to be heard. It's fascinating to me that people feel that I don't need to be understood even. I need to be accepted by virtue of the fact that I'm here in the way that a mountain or an ocean doesn't ask to be understood. It says, I exist. Accept me as part of the panoply of your awareness. And it's extraordinary to me, and this is where art becomes the remedy, how stiffly wedged in so much of our perception can be, as enforced through the media, as enforced through the government. But how art can work its way through the cracks to widen our view of what life looks like. And one only need turn to the animal kingdom to see just how incredibly beautiful and varied things are. And you can't say, well, the grasshopper has more or less value than the lion. Each has their purpose in the chain of life. Aren't you glad you asked a simple question and got an enormously long answer?
You know, you've been on my dream guest list for this reason. I knew the conversation would be this enlightening, so I'm just thrilled to be listening. It's beautiful. I'm so curious about so many things. First of all, where are you from?
I'm from Miami, Florida, and specifically a little enclave of that town called Coconut Grove, which was a little tropical paradise and a hub for immigrants. I'm a first generation American, and it was beautiful because I got to grow up around the sights and sounds of what, to harken back to what I just said, the beautiful variety of life was all around me. And in the children's theater where I went, I was the minority. And actually, it's shocking to me if you've never been in a scenario where you are the least populous of those in the space, you need to travel. You need to go somewhere where you are not the norm. And then you will actually understand what a lot of marginalized communities already feel like on a daily basis in our country.
Where are your parents from?
My dad's from Cuba, and my mom was born in the US, but the lineage is through Europe and Eastern Europe. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
Do you have any siblings?
I sure do. I have a sister who's a poet, singer, and a counselor and coach.
Wow.
And I have a brother who's an actor and a producer and a writer.
What were you like as a kid?
Very ambitious to get out.
Hmm.
I came from a home that was fractured at an early age, and I longed to rise above that noise. At first, I did it by impersonating other people because I thought the way out was through living in other people's skins.
Hmm.
Um, And that did afford me some traction. But what I later realized was the greater revelation was to be had in deepening and widening in one's own skin and all the possibility that exists within the ecosystem we contain, which is filled with characters in our blood lineage and, the dream pool from which we all draw.
That's what age did you have that realization? That's
Um,
huge.
Very young. I started at 5 or 6, and I knew that I was an outlier. I knew I was different, and I didn't know why, and I didn't know what it meant. But I knew when the first person said to me after a school play that I had something. What did he say? He said, "You have it." I didn't know what it meant, but I knew that whatever troubled me off stage did not trouble me on stage when I was a conduit for something that wanted to work through me, which is what the act of all art is, I think,
Yeah.
is being an instrument.
Have you done the artist's way?
Yes.
Okay. You just sound like a Julia Cameron book.
I did that
That
when
is
I
a
was.
huge compliment. She's brilliant.
I thank you. I did that when it came out, and it was deeply impactful then. And then I think the point of that is for you to live your artist's way
Yeah.
and cobble together your worldview through that, or at least your lens.
How was being a part of children's theater something that your parents encouraged, or how did you find yourself there?
Yeah, there. It's funny. There was a commercial on television. We only had 3 or 4 stations in those days, and it was for the Coconut Grove Children's Theater. And the kids looked like they were all oddballs, and they were all having fun, and they were in costumes, and they said their phone number, and I must have called them 50 times and hung up because I was too afraid. And then
Wow.
one day, through a series of events, I got an audition for them through, I think, a friend or client of my father's. And I wept. I wept before I walked into the children's theater, starting with the audition, and probably for the first year, before every session. My father held me. My sister was there. I'd asked my sister to come in. She didn't want to do it. We had, she was an innie, I was an outie. And I cried. I, I thought about that crying a lot because I I imagined I was subsuming some sense of terminal uniqueness in order to be part of a tribe of misfits who also felt terminally unique and then gave up that need for being defined through what you thought was odd about you and giving into the world of a play where we all agreed we could do this thing together and also hold space for an audience to let go of the sense of their individuality so they could leave the theater as a single organism with a united heartbeat.
That was so beautiful. I have to take a second. That whole sink in.
Thanks.
Oh my gosh. Um, when did you stop crying before entering the theater?
There was a moment I remember where I think my father was expecting it, and I just thought, oh, no, it's okay, I got this now. And I don't know what it is. I think it was the body finally aligning with the spiritual readiness, the somatic readiness, the spiritual readiness. And there are many levels of that. That happens. There are benchmarks through the years where you realize, oh, I've left another set of training wheels behind because my faith has enlarged to the degree that I trust something bigger is at play here.
What is your why as an artist?
My why is to inspire, uplift, and illuminate the divine potential in our humanity.
Oh, beautiful.
I think that we're here in body for a limited time, and why not string together the pearls of the eternal and our access to the eternal with greater frequency and greater conscious deliberation? I think people wait for miracles instead of inviting them, inculcating them, insisting on them.
So, was there ever a career path other than art in mind?
Never, I wouldn't say a devoted career path in mind, but there are certainly other things I imagine myself doing. You know, um, First I had to realize You have to understand this is the era of the multi-hyphenate. When I was growing up, if you were a multi-hyphenate, the subtle implication was that you were a failure at the primary
I
passion.
just had this word for word conversation with the mentor.
Yeah.
It's just so interesting hearing it again. Yeah.
So in terms of diversity, you know, what we've realized now is that as a storyteller, you can do it in any way, shape, or form. I mean, there are certainly other. I'm very drawn to cooking. I'm drawn to farm and bucolic life. Um, I'm drawn to travel writing. I'm drawn to animal rehabilitation and conservation efforts. So there are any number of things I could have done, and I'm sure I could have masqueraded as an attorney or a doctor if I really wanted to, but those were not my callings. Although you can play them on TV.
Um, did you have any family ties to the entertainment industry?
No. Uh, in the Eastern European ghetto, that was a space like the phenomenon of jazz in the United States, where marginalized groups in that crucible made art to entertain themselves, to keep themselves alive, and to retain some hotline to the great inspirer in and among us. Um, I later realized that certainly I had relatives in classical music, many, but there were some actors in the lineage that I would come to discover later in life, but there was no one in the immediate circle. In fact, what I learned later when I could metabolize the data was that both my mother and my father were extremely creative and could have had those careers. My
Mm.
father as a singer, and my mother, I would say, she wanted to be a dancer, but I could absolutely see her as a comedian or an actress. She has great pathos, and they were not of a generation where that was considered a legitimate or stable career, and we're just a few ticks off of that since influencer culture today has somehow convinced parents that there is monetization to be done through your performance, but I think that's a whole other ball of wax versus, looking at the arts as a legitimate career in the 50s and 60s.
So what did they think when that's what you wanted to do?
Oh, they loved it. I mean,
Really?
there was nothing but encouragement. My
Mm.
mother, took me to every audition and many sets. My father brought me to the children's theater, and they were deeply supportive. They came to the shows, and I think it took me a lot longer to understand why I was doing these things and the search for self actually through the mask of character that the career afforded me. And it's beautiful to meet younger artists because you can see that longing in them even if they don't have the words for it. And I do try to tether them to a why, so they're not just afloat in the land of I'm hoping someone will employ me versus
Mm.
I'm doing this for a reason.
Hmm. I felt that heart in every Bridge to Broadway conversation. I mean, I was on the one with Alan Menken and Judith Light.
Oh,
So many just like, oh my gosh, I was putting it on my calendar and I was like, I can't believe I'm gonna be on Zoom with Alan Menken today. That's just unbelievable.
Alan was so great, and he did it twice, if you can believe it. He was so wonderful.
No, just incredible.
And Judith, these are all artists who are filled with light,
Mm.
and they exist on that universal spine of a why.
Hmm.
They're not lollygagging artists. That the intention was to find people with intention, and even artists I knew less about. Somehow, when the questions were asked, it was very clear that we were brought together for a reason.
That is exactly how I feel about these conversations that I have on Behind the Resume. And what
Yeah.
you were saying too earlier about like starting with friends and then expanding. I mean, you're number 48. And I was just thinking like 48 insightful, inspiring conversations that have made me elevate in some way. It's just been so eye-opening.
Stop.
Who were your heroes growing up?
Um, well, I was fortunate that many of my heroes became my mentors, and I sought them out.
Mm.
I think the first two actors that impacted me were Dustin Hoffman and River Phoenix. Dustin Hoffman because Well, his work in Tootsie was a very direct correlative to what I just said a moment ago about a mask being used to reveal a truth. And his mask was very obvious because he was playing a woman. Um, and also, he looked like me.
Mm.
That's how I felt. River Phoenix spoke to longings in my heart that had not been articulated. And he later became a patient of my father. So there was a family connection there. And
Wow.
then I loved, oddly, I loved Marilyn Monroe. And I loved her because she resembled my mom to me. But in terms of the nuts and bolts of actual acting, um, Maureen Stapleton was my first mentor when I was 11. Chita Rivera when I was 16, huge inspiration, and Judi Dench when I was 22. And that's been something that sustained me for more than half my life, was being in an exchange with Judi Dench for that long. I value careers that have longevity and are not flashes in the pan. Jenna Rollins is another actress I absolutely adore, and her partnership with her late husband, John Cassavetes, because I always longed for a partner with whom I could build things as they did so beautifully.
I'm sure this is an impossible question to answer, but what was the biggest thing that you learned from being mentored by Judith Light? Or sorry, not Judith Light, Judi Dench. I'm just
That's
thinking of other
okay. Oh,
icons.
and as you say, there are others. I mean, Hal Prince and Carol Burnett, these are all people who just hung the moon for me, and I was lucky to work with them. Um, hmm, I think what comes to mind when I think about Judi Dench is fun,
Hmm.
and the sense of taking your work seriously but not yourself. And that's a lifesaver because I used to white knuckle everything. And that goes back to the why. If you're acting because you're terrified of dying alone, invisible, and forgotten, your work will reek of desperation. If you put your self worth on the line, your work will reek of desperation. Um, versus considering it an act of service in the world, your particular job, whether you're a plumber, a welder, or an actor, you're adding value, hopefully. And you're walking into space to add value, not to suck it dry. There's an energy of depletion among certain actors, and I think that's why people avoid us. I think once you tune into this spiritual millionaire you contain and that you're here to endow, then you become more of a pleasure to be with. And that sense of fluidity and pleasure and affluence is something I associate with Judi Dench.
Hmm.
Of course, excellence. I mean, she's excellent, and she doesn't pull attention to that fact. She does allow the work to speak for itself. And I think as we get older, ideally, we embody that. Less showmanship, more magnetism born of the act of communion with the inspired source, with less muss and fuss about it.
Hmm. I think about that concept of our souls agreed to this life before our physical bodies came to be. And I think sometimes when talking to people who this is not their career path calling, they look at the instability and the rejection, and they're like, how in the world could you do that? And it's because it's not a choice, it's a beautiful obligation. And I think it's so important to remind yourself that um it is your gift, and you are doing others a disservice by not sharing that gift in whatever art form that may be. But how do you think, as an artist, when dealing with said rejection and the emotional toll it takes on just living this lifestyle, how do you remain so spiritually grounded?
Well, first of all, I don't always, but on the days that I do, I don't think of it as rejection so much as I think of it as natural selection,
Hmm.
which means the universe is pruning out what doesn't belong in the orchard of me. And so things tend to make greater sense in hindsight. And I think this is why it's important to have a life. not a life connected with a why that supersedes this particular outlet. Because you can be a great up leveler as a garbage. I mean, I was a janitor for a while. I was a this, I was a that. I did this recipe in all of those settings. That's your brand, actually. So be happy where you are. I was out to dinner with a good friend, and they have absolutely no sense yet of what brings them joy, or as I like to say, what makes their tail wag when they are not being useful. And I said, you really ought to examine that, because if knowing that a walk by the water or a botanical garden or going to gallery night here in New York on Thursdays and looking at other people's art can't fill you, watching people pass you by on a park bench, I mean, this comes for free and it's unending. So knowing what brings you pleasure outside of, there's this expression: before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. So whether you're on Broadway or sitting on a park bench, you're doing your life the same way. And on the days I don't remember that, the job is to shorten the bounce back, strengthen the resilience, and ask yourself, uh, is the story that I'm telling myself true? And if not, what kind of mileage am I getting out of telling myself this false story? When you think about the people reputed to be the greatest actors of all time, whether it was Eleanor Duse or Marlon Brando or um, Edwin Booth or Ellen Terry or whomever else, 99.8% of humans have no idea who those people are anymore.
Mm.
I ask students today, who's Betty Davis? Who's Jack Nicholson? Who's Sidney Poitier? Who's Josephine Baker? They don't know. It's there for the taking and the appreciating, but the truth is, we all enter the flat line eventually. So, what are you doing right now that brings you joy? If you're not auditioning because you love sharing your love of acting and singing, but you want to get something instead, I understand the desire to seek evidence of your devotion through the reflection of work. As long as you have a healthy relationship with that appetite, great. But when it becomes everything, that's when you're in trouble. Go do some volunteer work. Go to another country. Go support someone unhoused. Help them get a meal. Pay for someone's groceries 3 slots behind you, or someone's coffee. Anonymous acts of kindness, to quote a dear friend and teacher of mine, Lee Kilton Smith. They're what make the world go round. The world you want to live in. The world we want to live in.
Have you always been so grounded and aware? No.
Oh, no, there was always a thread in there. There was always a compass that was waiting to be tended to and strengthened. But no, there's a lot of noise to be stripped out of the way, and that's a very conscious choice. There's certain people you avoid speaking with, even relatives at times, because the noise of what they have not tended to is so incredibly exhausting. It becomes your responsibility as a captive audience member.
Mm.
That's why I think when people aren't doing their art, as you mentioned a few moments ago, they really are deserving, because they're forcing people in their lives to be their audience for their unprocessed trauma and grief and creativity, the inverse of trauma and grief, creativity. Everyone is an artist. Let's start with that. Whether you're a dentist or an astronaut, whatever, if you're not living your life as a work of art, what are you waiting for? Your retirement, the weekend, a truck to hit you, God forbid, the next lifetime, heaven? I mean, when you have a 401k, if you're not engendering a life worth living now, then you're invested in safety, security, and predictability, which are not reliable. I tell my students a lot. Do you think the people who passed because of a tsunami this morning woke up thinking, this is my last day? I'll call that person and forgive them now.
Right.
No, sign up for the life you want to live today.
Have you read Big Magic?
Yes, I enjoyed that very much.
That book has changed the way that I live my life, and just
Worth
the
it.
concept of how we're here to be vessels. It's
We're
just
here to listen.
right. Yeah.
And that's how we be a vessel.
Hmm.
And listening is not just with you, listening is the wind, listening is the trends, listening is the subterranean stream that tells us take a left instead of a right.
And our gut as
Go
well.
back in the apartment. Yeah, you left something there. It's
Right.
got your back, our back.
Did you go to traditional school?
No, no, I went to a high school of the performing arts and then I didn't go to college. I trained, I studied some classical theater and physical theater in London and clown in Paris and improv at the Groundlings. And I met a mentor quite young as an actor and I studied religiously with him. And I was always taking classes and building a curriculum. And it's funny because when you're younger, it's about amassing tools and techniques and stepping stones, really. And then when you get older, it's letting one stone go after the other so that you make invisible tracks in the sand. So I stand on the shoulders of everything and everyone I've ever worked with. And eventually there'll be very little trace of any of that.
Was the end goal always Broadway, or it was everything
No,
up?
no, there was the end goal was light me up.
Hmm.
Was I want to be filled with light
Hmm.
and joy and the flame of conscious and deliberate living, being
Hmm.
on the inspired edge. Broadway did not come for a long time after I thought it might be interesting to experience. It was years. In fact, I tell a story that I came very close to about 6 Broadway shows and never crossed the finish line. And then I said, Eric, what is it inside you that is not willing to cross the finish line because you maintain more control over the story of failure than you do the freedom of success? And as soon as I did that work, I got my first Broadway show.
What was that work?
Oh, it was private. But I will say that, work with a therapist or a spiritual mentor or a 12-step group or all of the above and beyond that. But do the work of pulling the shadow into the light and building a safe repository for it.
Hmm.
Inner. Um, because our subconscious is in such extraordinary operation, particularly when we're auditioning. I mean, that's why public speaking scares the hell out of people, or being in front of a camera, because we presume they can see everything about us we don't want them to see. Well, if you do the work of making friends with what you don't want people to see, you'll be less afraid of the power you've assigned to that x-ray. And use your characters to excavate the spaces you've hidden in your heart so
You,
that you allow other people's secrets to be set free.
hmm.
Go ahead.
You said earlier that you had a near-death experience. Would you be comfortable
Yeah.
sharing that?
Well, when I was 17, it was a difficult time. Very long story short, I wasn't doing well in my health or my mentality. And I died in front of school and had a very powerful, revelatory experience meeting the thing that I think we've all been taught to fear. And then realizing that there was nothing to be afraid of except not living as that luminous presence that we can be,
Hmm.
that we can channel, I should say, and doing what we came here to do. So part of my job became thus doing my best to help other people be less afraid. Because we've got this whole liturgy around what's on the other side and doing things here to earn time there. And in accordance with my direct experience, none of that is so.
Hmm.
This is the heaven or hell that you have placed over there and made really important. This, what you're experiencing now, are you able to include other people in the circle of your heart, or is it only for these people and not for these? That's poverty. That's hell. Affluence, abundance is inclusion and widening with discernment, but by choice, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no. Um, what are you proudest of in your life?
Friendships. I became a good friend and thus elicited good friends from the fabric of my life. I love the people I love. I love the friends I've yet to make. I don't think it takes a lifetime to make a friendship. I think a moment of presence shared between beings can create instant intimacy and authentic connection that is not predicated on ever seeing them again. You know, when someone comes up to me at a stage door and I recognize their eyes because I was them
Mm.
and the kernel of them still exists within me, there's genuine contact. And people come up and say, gee, I don't know that you'll remember me. I was the student. And I say, yeah, I remember you because I took the time to see you. Because I remember the people who saw me, and they were few and far between. So why not prolong that gift?
Mm. Yeah, I have personal memory of that exact feeling of wanting to do whatever it took to be able to be in a position of seeing a young artist when they were, I'll just say it. I was on set of the prom and I was a dancer,
Yeah.
and it was the first day on set, and Ariana DeBose came up to me and gave me a hug and said I looked beautiful. And I just said to myself, I will literally do whatever it takes to be in a position of making somebody else feel like she made me feel important, you know? And what a
You
beautiful,
are in that position already. You get to do that every day at the grocery store,
yeah.
with the meter maid, with everyone you encounter. Don't wait till you're in
Mm.
her shoes or your shoes in the idealized state.
No, you're
That's
right.
the point. Bring that to the now.
Yeah.
Everyone's living in a state of uh, when, if, then. Don't do that. You know, that's living a life in escrow.
Mm.
It's like shine it now.
Mhm. Yeah, no, you're so right. That's always,
Ariana made a choice. I met Ariana while she was in Hamilton, and the choice to set a tone in a space, again, that's your brand, and it's not inauthentic as long as it comes from your truth. And not everyone wants it either, but you are the one who can put people at ease now, particularly people who don't feel seen regularly, habitually.
mm,
I say good morning all the time to people who don't look like anyone has ever said that to them. They're shocked. But you just maybe you change the course of their day, if not just your own. Offer, offer, offer.
are there causes that you're
Yeah,
specifically passionate about?
yeah. I love supporting young people in the arts, and I love supporting the protection of the rainforest and the cleanup of the ocean and the tending to of endangered species in particular, which ties
Hmm.
into rainforest.
What about rainforests and animals and nature lights you up?
Well, I don't think they have direct voices of their own. Their voices would require, or so it seems, based on how we've treated them, some measure of amplification. And I think the rainforest contains not only exquisite beauty, but cures, clean air, biodiversity, and wisdom that is so refined beyond our level of cognition. We cannot uh, we cannot discover its merit faster than we are burning it and cutting it down.
Mhm.
I believe in cause and effect, so I pick up the bottles of products I use or the foods that I use, and I look for words and terms that I realize 98% of people probably aren't looking at, but it means that something is being cut down and someone is being displaced and some marginalized community is being forced to live next to our dumpage or our radioactive matter because I wanted the convenience of something with, for instance, palm oil,
Mhm.
which isn't so much. But we are so divorced from what the effect of a single use plastic bag or straw is doing to this planet. And people are having more children, but not looking at how what they are buying is killing the ground that their children would be inheriting. That's very important to me. Obviously, I have political leanings as well, but yeah.
Are you just as passionate about TV film work as theater?
Oh, yes. Yeah. I mean, TV film work is distributed much farther and wider than theater ever will be.
Mhm.
And it's thus, in a way, more important. Because TV and film is how someone living in the cornfields finally sees someone that doesn't look like them, or they finally see someone who feels as they feel, but they have yet to find that role model we started off talking about. That's why seeing Dustin and seeing River knocked me out. I didn't think there was anyone who could be my friend until I saw River Phoenix on screen. So I've had kids come up to me and say, because of something you tweeted back when I did tweet, I'm not going to kill myself.
Mhm.
Now that's crazy. That's crazy. But you think about it, you can use that as a destructive means of communication or a very empowered one. And the makers who are daring to show slices of life to which we have yet to be exposed, that's where the power lives. And by power, I just mean life force being summoned for good, ideally.
Do you have a favorite musical?
uh, uh,
Good question.
yeah, I mean, I like, there are three musicals I generally cite. I like Sunday in the Park with George, I
Yeah.
like Caroline or Change, and I like Passing Strange.
Hmm.
I don't think there are not too many others in the more standard variety that have knocked me out, although I think that many of them have great virtues and sublime songs. I mean, thank God for musicals. There's so many beautiful songs that have come from them.
Would you ever write a musical?
No, probably not. I do hear music and sometimes record it on the phone late at night from my dream, but that's more for like an album. I don't I at this point am more drawn towards cinematic
Oh.
stories. Um, most musicals now as adaptations of earlier IP or revivals or somehow attempts to encompass everything that they think the world wants to see. I have a slightly more subversive taste than that. Most of the things I end up loving are at the Brooklyn Academy of Music or the St. Anne's Warehouse because they're international companies, um, and there's an edge to them. And the thing about them, not to sound very highfalutin, but they don't answer every question.
Yeah.
I don't want you to take such good care of me as an audience member. I want to lean forward and question and be involved and part of the conversation, through the airwaves if I'm going to see a musical. And I think that a lot of live entertainment, has assumed the posture of, well, people are used, this is a streaming culture, so they need to be pushed back into their seats, not participating, but it's like handing a child an iPhone instead of a block of wood. You give the kid the wood, their imagination's going to have to collaborate versus you provided the sound, the sight, the duration, the rules of the game, and that's how you build an obedient culture.
Hmm.
I want to be taught to dream. I want to be taught to imagine. I don't want to be taught to obey. I want to be taught to be allegiant to what I feel I need to obey, which is my own direct contact with Source. I was literally just recording something about this, which is we're addicted to interpreters. We're
Mm.
addicted to critics. We're addicted to priests. We're addicted to anyone who purports to stand in the way of our direct transmission. But that's what, I saw you the other night at a Sondheim concert in which that beautiful line was written. Anything you do, let it come from you. Then it will be new. Give us more to see. So you can only be derivative if you're trying to do it through market testing and determine what they want. Who is they? It's creativity is an act of listening,
Mm.
as is living. You know,
That performance, that art was channeling through you so powerfully. It was so, I mean, besides just your gorgeous voice, but between you and Carolyn McNeely, who I know is a mentor to both of us, besides just beautiful, it was powerful.
I'm glad. Thank you. Well, it's funny. There's always fear, right? The fear is the body. Well, the Greeks say that nerves are the gods of courage entering the body. And I think the fear that emerges is the same fear that the single drop of water must feel before it hits the ocean. It's like we all want to surrender to something larger in theory, but are we really willing to let go of our singularity in order to assume global citizenship? Which is what happens when something wonderful takes us over. It's an act of service. We are sacrificing something in ourselves to support the storytelling and that upliftment and illumination and ideally inspiration within the audience. And it also heals us. It heals us as the instruments of it.
Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah, yeah, it is. It is. I was, you know, you've got to do what you know you have to do. I'm being cryptic when I say that, but what I'm meaning is that there are a lot of voices along the way at truck stops along the way who didn't do or aren't doing the thing that they wanted to do. And they're very interested in telling you how to do the thing. But they cannot know because it's yours. It is yours uniquely. Now you will know the tribesfolk who have their hands and arms on you and encourage you to. I had a friend recently who said, essentially, I'm breaking up with you as a friend, Eric. I don't think you get me, and I must move on. And they seemed very committed to that stance. And I said, well, the final measure of my friendship is, do I love you well enough to set you free? And the answer is yes. Be the human who loves others well enough to set them free. However that lands within you, that's what you want. People who try to encase you and trap you, corral you, it ain't love. And forgive them if that's the way they learned love to look. But there is another kind of love. And there was a beautiful interview with Maureen Stapleton, my first mentor, talking about Montgomery Clift, who was a great actor I also really loved. And I think she was crying because Montgomery Clift had a real problem with alcoholism, and she was crying to their mutual friend Roddy McDowell. These are a lot of names you'll look up, perhaps. And she said, Roddy, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. And he said, all you can do is hold his hand to the grave. Now, that's a little morbid, but if you look at Ram Dass says something similar, which is we're all here to walk each other home,
Mm.
not to own each other. So, yeah, if someone receives something because of an act of courage that you have engaged, that's a wonderful gift. And you were the conduit of that. The best you can do is be the conduit of that.
Mm. I've been trying to figure out how to live with urgency,
Mhm.
but not take it in a morbid direction of, tomorrow isn't promised, because as true as that is, that's also kind of stressful to think about. So how how do you do that?
I would replace the word urgency with intent.
Hmm.
Yeah. So you're threading yourself through something beyond this lifetime, right?
Mhm.
And wake up in the morning and go to bed at night and ask, did my actions line up with that intent? And then be grateful you had another day, either in retrospect or when you wake up the next morning. So live on purpose, not in terror, right? So it's just the way you look at it, right? And nothing is promised in terms of everything's got a shelf life here. So lean in with curiosity. If today were my last day, how would I comport myself? Well, I wouldn't flagellate myself because I'm not where I want to be as a singer, as an actor, whatever. I'd say, you learned. You held your own hand. You were tender with you. You brought you forward. You moved an inch. The compound interest of that movement will build on itself if you continue to intend your way forward.
I could listen to you talk all day. It's just wow. If your 15-year-old self could see you now, what do you think he'd say?
Can't believe you lived so long. You know, it was not an easy time when I was 15 years old, both domestically, but also the world was in. I mean, AIDS was ravaging the world. There was no support for non heteronormative human beings. Um, there was certainly no internet through which to connect. Um, it was a very lonely time. It was a very suicidal time for me. And I use that harsh word because I don't want any young people out there or older people out there who are listening to this to imagine that, you know, I woke up singing with a bird flying out of my ass like Snow White. This is a choice. This is a choice to experience wellness and possibility. Larry Moss, the great acting teacher, says actors fail for one of two reasons: psychology or technique. I happen to believe most of it is psychology.
Mm.
Because whatever cadavers you're dragging around from your parenting, from your upbringing, from whatever, turn them into tools instead of albatrosses, you know? So 15-year-old me was convinced I wouldn't live that much longer. Also, that if I loved someone, I would be dead shortly thereafter, because that was the world we were told we caused,
Mm.
which was very damaging, very, very damaging to me. And still, I live with the repercussions of that, the ricochet inside. Um, it's a world that your generation blessedly did not know or maybe heard about. But yeah, I think the 15-year-old in me would be pleased to know that he could love well and be loved well, and that he could get out of his way enough to support other people's sense of viability on this planet. When people thank me, they're not thanking me. They're thanking a space that I chose to hold open for myself, for my own survival. And I'm glad when they say things because it's like all those dark nights of the soul through which I traversed were worth muddling through. Ultimately, we're here to support other people's expansion and courage. People need to live a courageous life, not in theory, in practice, and to build emotional connective tissue where they are afraid to tread. It doesn't always work. But when it does, I was at Cheetah Rivera's visitation about a month ago, and I was chatting with a dear friend of hers as well, and she said Cheetah looked at it as her job to make as many lives better as she possibly could in a single day, to the point that she didn't remember how, what, or why. Just spread seeds of goodness. Now, what more could you want?
Yeah.
I mean, all those. I spoke at another friend's memorial, Lynn Cohen, who was a wonderful actress, and her husband Ron too. And I remember the first line of the speech coming to me again in the shower, probably, which was, "The greatest thing you can give someone is a chance. So be the person who gives life and others a chance, as you've been given one." And it's not, again, it's not highfalutin work. This is the daily grind.
Mm.
And try not to distinguish between people. The person who, if you're lucky enough to afford a cup of coffee, the person who makes your coffee, the person who sweeps the streets, the person you think might be your agent. Do not change your face. Be the united you, the brand of you. Not because I told you to, but because it feels so damn good.
Mm. Yeah, that's really gonna stick with me for forever. That's really
Well, take what you like and leave the rest.
I like all of it. So um what do you want your legacy to be?
Leaving things better than I found them. And that includes people, places, and things. Where where that is wanted. My job is no longer, and never was, to recruit the ambivalent. So I am here to connect with people who want to be connected with. Buddha once said, we're not here to awaken the sleeping, but to support the awake.
Mm.
I believe there are enough people who have awakened and want to awaken and are excited about it, that there could be a critical mass through which those who may insist on slumbering longer decide maybe there's some benefit in awakening. You know, I'll tell you this anecdote briefly, which was that I was at a luncheon, and there was a fellow on the other end of the table espousing all his ideas about what's so screwed up about pronoun choices and the transgender community, and on and on and on. And I just asked him at some point, because everyone was quietly nodding, but the energy was really sinking. So it wasn't aligned with life force. And I said, "Have you had any personal experience with anything you describe? Or has anyone you loved had personal experience with what you describe?" "Well, no." I said, "Well, I have. So why don't you allow me to share with you my lived experience?" And of course, he got very flustered and wanted to apologize. There's no need for apologize. There is a need for listening,
Mm.
because you are locked into the circuit of your own righteous indignation. Let me tell you what it's like to live through some of these things in my experience. And I don't represent the whole. No one person represents the whole. And we were both humbled by that exchange, because he would have gone home thinking the same things he thought when he walked in. But then why did we meet for the lunch, if not to be changed? It was scary for me, and I had to be ready to leave or be kicked out, because I was breaking the stronghold that his thought form had on him and was influencing this group. The reason I'm telling you that is this: speak up, not to cancel someone and not to browbeat them and not to be superior. Speak up to widen the circle of what you know. What you know. That's the only way that these conversations can change, is by saying, You know a me. You know someone like the person you're trying to denigrate. I know someone like the person you're trying to denigrate, and I'm not afraid to tell you they are a fucking stand-up person. You think it's harder to endure a 27-part gender confirmation surgery, to live on hormones that will shorten your lifespan and deal with the rejection of your family and 90% of anyone living outside of a major metropolis, than to cross your arms and say, I don't like trans people? Well, why don't you get to know one
Mm.
or 100? I mean, it takes such extraordinary strength for humans to be who they know themselves to be now. And thank goodness we have a space in which more of that is encouraged. But to bring us back to where we started, I don't need you to understand the mountain, the ocean, or the transhuman. I need you to accept that these things exist and share the earth with you. The longer you resist it, the more you cut yourself off from something and someone beautiful who's here to teach you. Messengers, right? I remember on my suicide trip, I met a reverend. She was marvelous. And she said, well, Erik, you know, God doesn't make any junk.
Hmm.
Hit me like a ton of bricks. I thought, my God, could that be true? That I am not an accident? I wasn't dragged together from the remains of the good things and swept together and turned into a sausage or whatever. You know, like, I'm here for a reason, as is every creature in that rainforest, as are you. Everything is. So, how about having respect, awe, and humility around that variety versus, again, using an interpreter or an interpretive bit of text to justify how much you can exclude something or someone? If you really tune into that, that's not power, that's force. Resistance can feel powerful, but it is weakness. True power lies in inviting intimacy by having conversations like these.
You're incredible.
So
I'm
are you. You
oh,
had the questions. I just showed up in response to the questions.
oh, thank you. I am so moved, inspired, enlightened, all the things. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for sharing your knowledge and your heart and your wisdom. I'm so excited to share this conversation, and I hope it touches others just as much as it's touched me, because I'm really grateful. So thank you.
Thank you for the time and those questions. And you are helping people feel less alone. So I'm proud to be a little part of your efforts, your intention.
Thank you, Erik.
Take good care.